You came back. We knew you would. Welcome to Fear Consortium Season 3. What began as a whisper has grown into something we can no longer control, and neither can you. This season we go deeper than we've ever dared, past the shadows you've learned to live with, into the ones you've tried to forget. Before we descend, subscribe. Turn on every notification, because this season missing an episode isn't just a choice. It could be a mistake. So settle in, turn down those lights, and remember, whatever follows you out of this place tonight, you invited it in. This is Fear Consortium. Season 3 has begun. He was in the corner of the room when you went to sleep last night. He was there when you woke up. He has been there, in one corner or another, for longer than you have been alive. He is very patient. He has nowhere else to be. Close your eyes for a moment. I want you to picture a figure. Not a creature, not a monster with claws or wings, or jagged teeth, or eyes that glow red in the dark. Not something that moves with supernatural speed or makes sounds that have no name. Just a figure, standing in the corner of a room, dressed like a man, a trench coat, a broad-brimmed hat, the silhouette of someone who stepped out of a 1940s detective novel and into the wrong reality. Recognizable, familiar in its outline, the shape of a person, except there are no features, no face beneath the brim, no hands visible at the coat's sleeves, no skin, no eyes, no identifying detail of any kind. Just shadow, solid shadow. The shape of a man assembled entirely from the absence of light, standing in your bedroom corner, standing in your hallway, standing at the foot of the stairs as you come down in the dark for a glass of water. Standing exactly where it was when you went to sleep, looking, if something without eyes can look, directly at you. This is the Hatman, and unlike almost every other entity we have explored this season, he does not run, he does not vanish, he does not retreat into walls or dissolve into shadow when you see him. He simply stands there, and when he is finished standing there, he walks away, like a man leaving a room, like someone who simply decided it was time to go. The reports began, or at least the recorded reports began, in the latter half of the 20th century. But witnesses who have studied the phenomenon carefully have found accounts that reach back much further, descriptions scattered through historical texts and personal diaries, and the letters of ordinary people who encountered something they had no framework to explain and tried their best to put into words. A shadowy figure in a hat, standing, watching, making no move toward the witness, making no sound, just departing eventually, on its own terms and in its own time. The consistency across centuries and cultures and people who had no conceivable connection to each other is the first thing that researchers note. It is also the first thing that makes the explanation of shared cultural mythology difficult to sustain. Because these are not people who read the same stories, not people who watched the same films, or visited the same websites, or even heard the same campfire tales. Some of them could not have encountered the legend in any form before their experience. They say something, and then, when they tried to describe it, the description matched descriptions from people on the other side of the world who had also seen something and also tried to describe it. The same hat, the same coat, the same stillness, the same walk when it finally goes. To understand how the Hatman moved from private terror to public legend, you have to understand a radio show. In the 1990s and early 2000s, Coast to Coast AM was the single most important platform in American paranormal culture. Hosted first by Art Bell, a broadcaster with an instinct for the genuinely strange and the patience to let witnesses tell their stories at full length. The show broadcast into the small hours of the morning across hundreds of stations nationwide. Its audience was enormous, devoted, and composed of exactly the kind of people who had seen things they couldn't explain, and had been waiting for years for a place to say out loud. Coast to Coast AM was where the Hatman found his name. In the early 2000s, a researcher and author named Heidi Hollis began appearing on the show to discuss what she was documenting. An overwhelming volume of accounts arriving from listeners and readers and people who found her through early internet channels, all describing the same figure, the same hat, the same coat, the same standing and watching and deliberate, unhurried departure. Hollis had not invented the phenomena. She had simply begun collecting it, organizing it, giving it a name that people could attach to their experience and use to find others who had shared it. The response when she spoke about it on air was immediate and massive. The phone lines opened and did not stop. Caller after caller from different states, different backgrounds, different decades of life described the same figure in the same terms with the same emotional weight of people who had been carrying something unspoken for a very long time and were finally, for the first time, hearing someone else describe it back to them. The relief in those calls was palpable. You seen him too? I thought I was alone. I thought I was losing my mind. Hollis eventually compiled her research into the Hatman, the true story of evil encounters, one of the first sustained book-length attempts to document the phenomena comprehensively. What she found across thousands of accounts was a pattern so consistent it challenged every conventional explanation available. The Hatman had a name now, and a name, as we have learned this season, changes everything. But the legend did not begin with Coast to Coast AM. To find where it truly begins, you have to go back further, much further, to the Middle Ages, where European manuscripts and church records contain scattered descriptions of dark, cloaked figures, man-shaped, featureless, observed standing at bedsides and doorways and at the edges of fields in the darkest hours of the night. Medieval scholars categorized them under the broad umbrella of demonic visitation. The church had a framework for everything, and a shadow figure that watched the living fitted neatly into its taxonomy of evil presences. But the accounts, read without the theological overlay, sound familiar. Standing, watching, still, gone on its own terms. The same entity, different century, different costumes. And the medieval version wear robes, where the modern version wears a trench coat, because the brain, as we noted, dresses what it sees in the clothing of its own era. In 17th century England, diarists and letter writers described what they called dark watchers, shadow figures, distinctly human in outline, observed most often at night and most often in states of extreme stress or grief. The accounts were treated, at the time, as evidence of spiritual oppression, as signs that the person being watched had drawn a negative spiritual attention through sin or weakness. The interpretation has changed across the centuries. The figure has not. In Native American traditions across several nations, shadow figures, beings of darkness and observation, appear in oral histories as entities that exist at the boundary between the living world and whatever lies beyond it. Not malevolent, necessarily, not benevolent either, liminal, existing in the threshold space that ordinary living beings are not meant to occupy, coming to the boundary and looking through it at the people on the other side, always watching, never crossing. The Hatman specifically, with his distinctly mid-20th century wardrobe, appears in accounts most densely from the 1940s onward. The wide-brimmed hat and the long coat are the clothing of a specific era in American cultural memory. The era of film noir, of private detectives, of men who stood in the shadows of city streets and watched things they were paid to watch. There is a theory, unverifiable but persistently compelling, that the Hatman adopted this particular visual template at this particular point in history because it was the template of the collective cultural mind had most recently assigned to the act of watching from the shadows. He looks like a man who observes for a living, because that, perhaps, is precisely what he does. The internet accelerated everything. In the early 2000s, as online paranormal communities began to organize around shared experiences, forums, message boards, early social media platforms, the Hatman accounts poured in with a speed and volume that no previous documentation effort could have captured. People who had spent years believing their experience was unique, personal, possibly indicative of mental illness. People who had never spoken about what they saw found threads and forums and communities where the description they had been carrying in private was posted by stranger after stranger after stranger. The Reddit community R Paranormal and its offshoots became repositories of hundreds of Hatman accounts over the following decade. What made these different from the coast-to-coast AM era reports was the detail the internet allowed. People could write at length, include context, respond to follow-up questions, be challenged and challenged back. The accounts that survived that scrutiny, the ones that remained internally consistent under questioning, that didn't shift or elaborate conveniently when pressed, were the ones that built the legend's credibility in communities that took credibility seriously. Paranormal researchers began cross-referencing the accounts geographically, demographically, temporarily, looking for patterns that might indicate hoax or contamination. Moments where the legend was feeding itself, where people were describing the Hatman because they had already encountered descriptions of the Hatman and were unconsciously incorporating the details. What they found instead was the same pattern that Heidi Hollis has found. The accounts that preceded any knowledge of the legend matched the accounts that followed it. First-time witnesses who had never heard of the Hatman, who came to the forums confused and frightened, and searching for any framework that might help them understand what they had seen, described exactly what the people who had been talking about him for years described. The hat, the coat, the stillness, the patience, the walk. Always the walk. The legend at this point had become something significant in American paranormal culture. It had a name, a documented history, a dedicated research community, and thousands of accounts spanning centuries and continents. But it had not begun with any of these things. It had begun, as all the legends in this season had begun, with a person, alone in a room, seeing something that should not be there, and then living afterward with the weight of having seen it. Heidi Hollis spent years collecting accounts before writing her book, The Hatman, The True Story of Evil Encounters. One of the first sustained attempts to document the phenomena comprehensively, what she found in thousands of accounts from around the world was a pattern so consistent it challenged every conventional explanation available. The witnesses were not a demographic, they were not a type. Children, some as young as 3 and 4 years old, reported the figure with the clarity and distress of people describing something real. Not an imaginary friend, not a dream character, something that stood in the corner of their bedroom and watched them sleep, something that was still there when they woke up. Adults reported it appearing during periods of profound stress, illness, grief, crisis, the particular exhaustion of lives under sustained pressure, as if something in the resonance of extreme human distress was a signal. A frequency that could be heard from wherever the Hatman exists when he is not here. Elderly people in the final stages of illness, in hospital rooms and hospice beds, and their own bedrooms in the last days of their lives, reported him frequently, standing in the corner, watching with that featureless face, waiting. What he is waiting for? That is the question no one has answered with any certainty. The accounts that circulate in paranormal communities are numerous, and the ones that endure, the ones that spread and stick and get passed from forum to forum, from reader to reader, are the ones that contain the detail that every witness seems to arrive at independently. He walks away. A woman in Ohio, a nurse, a person who spent her professional life in the empirical world of medicine, wrote about waking at 2 a.m. to find the figure standing in the corner of her bedroom. She had encountered accounts of the Hatman before. She knew intellectually what she was looking at. The knowledge did not help. She described the dread as physical, as something that settled in the chest and made breathing an effect rather than a reflex. She lay still, not from rational strategy, but from the involuntarily paralysis that certain kinds of fear produce, and she watched it. It watched her. For approximately 20 minutes, by her account, and then, without any apparent trigger, without reacting to her presence in any observable way, it turned, slowly, the way a man turns when he's decided to leave a room, and it walked to the wall and did not pass through it. Exactly, but ceased to be visible, the darkness of it dissolving into the ordinary darkness of the corner, without drama or spectacle or any of the theatrical exit strategies other paranormal entities seem to favor. She wrote, "What stayed with me wasn't the fear, it was a sense that I had been observed, that something had sat with me for 20 minutes, the way you sit with a patient, quietly, attentively, taking something in, and that whatever it learned from watching me, it took with it when it left." She has not seen it since. She does not know if that is reassuring. A man in rural Georgia, a retired sheriff deputy who submitted his account to a paranormal research group in 2016, described an encounter that had occurred more than 30 years prior and that he had never spoken about publicly. He had been 24 years old, working a night shift, parked on a rural road between calls, filling out paperwork in his patrol car. He looked up and the figure was standing on the road, approximately 30 feet in front of his headlights. He described the specific wrongness of that moment, the way the headlight should have illuminated a person clearly, shown his clothing and skin and features, the way they instead showed something that absorbed the light rather than reflect it. A hat, a coat, a shape that was definitely human in outline and definitely not human in substance. He reached for the radio. He did not call it in. He sat with his hand on the radio for what he estimated was 4 minutes, though he acknowledged, as nearly every Hatman witness acknowledges, that time behaved strangely during the encounter, and watched the figure stand in his headlights and do nothing. And then it walked off the road. Not running, not vanishing, walking. The way a man walks when he has somewhere to be and is no in particular hurry getting there. Into the ditch, up the embankment, into the tree line. He sat in the car for another hour before he could make himself drive again. He said, "In 30 years of law enforcement, I encountered things that should have broken me and didn't. But I think about the road every single night, because everything I saw in my career, I had a framework for it. I had training, experience, context. The thing on the road didn't fit any framework I had. It still doesn't. And I'm not a man who tolerates not having a framework for things." The children's accounts deserve their own weight, because children, young children below the age where cultural contamination fully operates, children who have not been primed by horror films or internet rabbit holes, or the accumulated fear vocabulary of adults, describe him with the same specificity as everyone else. A mother in Seattle wrote about her 5-year-old daughter beginning to mention, casually, the man in her room at night. The way children just mention things that are simply part of their experience. The way they tell you about something at school or something they noticed in the yard. No drama, no heightened effect. "The man in the hat was in my room again last night." The mother, who had her own encounter with what she recognized as the Hat Man when she was a teenager, an encounter she had never mentioned to anyone in the household, asked her daughter to describe him. The description was exact. A shadow, a coat, a hat, standing in a corner, not doing anything, just there. The daughter said he made her feel like she was being looked at very hard. She said she didn't think he was mean. She said she thought he was studying. The mother did not know what to do with this. She did not know whether to move, to intervene, to seek help, or to simply accept that the thing she had counted at 15 had found her child in a different city, in a different decade, and was apparently continuing whatever project it had started. She wrote, "She's not afraid of him. I'm afraid enough for both of us." The theories are many, as they always are. Shadow people, a broader category of paranormal phenomena of which the Hatman is considered a specific and particular defined subtype, have been reported for as long as people have been reporting the paranormal. They are typically described as darker than the surrounding darkness, as possessing a three-dimensional solidity that ordinary shadows lack, as occupying space in the way physical objects occupy space, rather than the way light does. The Hatman is distinguished from generic shadow people by his consistency, by the clothing, by the deliberateness of his behavior. Most shadow people, when seen, vanish immediately, startled, reactive, seemingly as surprised by the encounter as the witness. The Hatman is not surprised by anything. He does not react to being seen. He does not flee. He stands. He watches. He leaves when he chooses to leave. Paranormal researchers who have devoted years to cataloging his appearances have proposed several frameworks. Some argue he is an interdimensional entity, a being from an adjacent layer of reality that intersects with ours under certain conditions. That the trench coat and fedora are not clothing but the shape his energy takes when observed through human perception, the brain reaching for the closest recognizable template and landing on a silhouette of a mid-century man because something in that shape is the closest match to what is actually there. Others argue he is something much older than the 20th century clothing, that the hat and the coat are a modern overlay, the way the brain renders an ancient presence in contemporary terms, that he has always been here in one perceived form or another, and the fedora is simply the current costume. Some researchers, those who take seriously the accounts of children of the dying of people in states of extreme psychological stress, have proposed that the Hatman exists at the intersection of human fear and human consciousness, that he is drawn not to places but to states of mind, to the particular frequency of sustained dread, to grief and crisis, and the 3 a.m. vulnerability of people who are, in those moments, more open than they normally are to whatever exists in the spaces they can't usually perceive. That he feeds on terror in a theory that appears across multiple independent research frameworks, not in the dramatic sense of a creature that attacks and drains, in a quieter, more patient sense, the sense of something that cultivates a specific emotional state, that stands in the corner and lets the fear build and sustains itself on that building. The way a fire sustains itself on the oxygen it draws from the room it's consuming. He does not need to move. He does not need to threaten. He only needs to be there. The fear does the rest. What separates the Hatman from every other entity this season is something simple. Something that should, by all logic, be less frightening than claws and wings and wailing and draining blood from livestock in the night. He looks like a person. Not approximately like a person, not person-shaped in the way a scarecrow is. He looks like a man standing in a room, like your neighbor, like someone who walked in through a door that you don't remember opening. And because he looks like a person, because the silhouette is the silhouette of a human being in ordinary clothes, the mind keeps trying to resolve him as one. Keeps searching for the explanation that makes him mundane. A trick of light. A coat hung on the back of a door. Someone who came in without you noticing. And then he turns. And he walks away. And there is no coat on the door, and there was no one in the house. And the fear that you've been holding at the manageable distance, the fear you've been managing by reaching for a rational explanation, drops it into you all at once. Because you know in that moment that you are not alone, that something chose to be in the room with you, that it watched you for however long it watched, and learned whatever it was trying to learn, and left. And you have no way of knowing when it's coming back, or rather, it's already here. So tonight, when the lights go off, take a moment before you close your eyes. Look at the corners. Not because you'll see anything, probably, but because he has been seen in corners exactly like yours, in houses exactly like yours, by people who are exactly as certain as you are right now that the room was empty. And the detail that stays with every single witness, the detail no one forgets no matter how many years pass, is not the shape of him or the darkness of him, or even the terrible patience of him. It's the walk, the slow, unhurried walk of something that is not afraid of you, that was never afraid of you, that simply decided in its own time, on its own terms, that it was done with you, for now. And so it ends for now. You've survived another descent into the dark, but survival, as you've learned, comes with a cost. The things you heard tonight don't stay here. They travel with you, through the hallways, into the quiet rooms, behind the eyes that close but never quite rest. This is what Season 3 does. It doesn't just scare you, it stays. If you felt it, subscribe. Share it with someone brave enough to listen. Leave a review, leave a comment, because your words carry this darkness further than you know. And turn on the notifications, because the next episode is already waiting, already breathing. We'll be here when you return. We're always here. This has been Fear Consortium, Season 3, where the fear doesn't fade, it evolves. Sleep well. We'll be watching.